Hi everyone, I want to welcome you back. I have not done a live stream because I am doing a lot of writing. In fact, I did an article about West Bengal, two articles about West Bengal in the past week, and for me, it really was an eye opener. What's happened in that part of the world and how much that we miss about it. I don't know if it's because I didn't know. I mean, there was definitely something I knew about Bangladesh being a country where, there were tons of refugees. I just never really read in depth about it. Obviously, everybody has certain aspects of world history or world conflicts that they don't know about or ignore or just they're not conscious of. So when I was in that talk earlier, I was in a phone call with Jamarl Thomas. You can see the link. I'm going to try to put it in the description. If I forget to put it in the description, you can look at it um, on my channel, the video before this one. It really was a frustrating conversation, and unfortunately, that's why I do get belligerent because, unfortunately, people believe that when you're in a discussion, the discussion that happens to be an argument, that I'm trying to force somebody to come and see my point of view. So I'll have to clarify a few points. I would never say, even as much as I hate her, and I hate her entire career, and I do wish ill on her, that you shouldn't watch and observe Abby Martin's media. I mean, if I can do it, why can't you? The moment that I say to somebody, "Don't look at that," don't pay attention to that. What do you think that is? That's Streisand effect. That's me basically telling the people, "Oh, this is something you shouldn't see." Wink, wink. It might be very important, but you wouldn't want to spoil your peace of mind by looking at something that disturbs you. People obviously look at it out of curiosity. So there's a few points I want to clarify. He was trying to say that I have a blind spot. Why would I have a blind spot? I'm not the person working for a media corporation. Do you think somebody working for a media corporation or for a state actor would call in to, with all due respect, kind of, a self-started show on the internet? I do like Jamarl's show, but let's be honest. You have somebody like Abby Martin working for Telesur. Telesur is owned by a number of Latin American countries that are part of, what do they call it? Hold on. I have to find it. Let me see here. Oh, we'll just go to their site. It's sponsored primarily by the government of Venezuela, but also by Cuba, Nicaragua, Uruguay, and Bolivia. Okay, Uruguay I don't really have an issue with. These are countries that are part of the ALBA bloc. That's the word. The ALBA bloc, the Alliance of Bolivarian, what's it called? It's in America. I don't know what the L stands for. Here we go. Let's go for ALBA. The Bolivarian Alliance for the Peoples of Our America. All of the countries that are in that own Telesur, apart from Paraguay, are part of ALBA, which is basically a regional bloc of nations that are ideologically aligned with the government in Caracas. And what she's basically doing is representing the government viewpoint. You cannot, this is something that Jamarl, if let's say I was to present news from Channel 1, Israel's Channel 1, he would obviously call it biased. That's why I never ever use Israeli sources when I discuss a story. Not state sources. I try not even to use people who are Israeli who work on stories for other publications. And I often do criticize them. I get shit for criticizing. I get shit from the pro-Israel people. By the way, he called me a Zionist after the show. I don't have any philosophical belonging to Zionism. So does that mean I get to call him a communist next time I call in? I will be calling in again, but hopefully it'll be a little more cool. We won't get this heated discussion. But in any case, in order to present a topic with the best and clearest, vision, you can't use sources that are completely partisan to the conflict. And when you're using Telesur to talk about Venezuela, you're basically using state propaganda. Now, when you look at Telesur's coverage of Gaza, you have to notice that they're completely partisan. It says here, why Israel feels threatened by popular resistance in Palestine. Okay, that's their. They don't represent that as opinion, by the way. Okay, actually they do in this case. Oh, good for them. But in any case, they tell things that are blatant lies. Okay, as news. This is not represented as opinion. It's represented as news. You can see here where my cursor is. It says News of the World. It's by, they don't have an author for the article. That's another telling issue. Then they go for Israel's ongoing ethnic cleansing. Although this has nothing to do with the topic of Gaza. These are illegal immigrants from other African countries. African countries that are south of Egypt. What does that have to do with ethnic cleansing? By the same token, you could argue that Egypt is engaging in ethnic cleansing by not allowing these people safe harbor in their country. They flee from Sudan, they flee from Eritrea. You don't see Telesur articles about Egypt. And Egypt is an American ally. So isn't that interesting? Another thing that Jamarl really, something that really annoyed me was that he talked about America's, quote, special relationship with Israel. I would say that the special relationship should be defined as such. Israel they don't have many allies on the international scene. And I would say America is the only one that really has any power. So I would call that the special relationship. Of course, there is a lobbying relationship in Congress, which I talk about all the time. I say that I'm against all lobbying groups. That includes AIPAC. And I always say that the reason that the region is not as does not have any resolution is because of lobbying groups. And AIPAC is one of those lobbying groups. There's other lobbying groups too. You don't think that OPEC is a lobbying group? Because if you don't think so, then obviously you don't understand the impact of oil on the world economy. OPEC is a major lobbying group. They might not lobby directly to Congress, but they do lobby the government. Saudi Arabia, people are complaining now that Saudi Arabia is not as hostile to the Israelis as they used to be, but they weren't complaining back in the 1980s and 1970s when Saudi Arabia was extremely hostile to the Israelis, and they were part of the OPEC cartel that was squeezing oil supplies to the West. Okay? It's a simple fact. Either you don't believe in lobbying, either you don't believe in these cartels controlling world commodities, or you do, or, that's fine. You can openly support OPEC. There's people who openly support AIPAC. So either way, you're wrong, but you have every right to be wrong. Okay, this story includes, about Al-Quds Day last Friday. I don't like talking about this, but eventually I just do. Okay, I do because I think that accuracy and frankness and being able to discuss a topic without resorting to complete distortion and lies is important. And he got mad when the Israelis edited a clip of a video with a medic who had been shot. Okay, so how about this? I'm mad when Telesur, which is Abby Martin's publication, claimed that organizers of the demonstration in Gaza said Israeli army drones hovered above their land, dropping flammable materials on piles of old tire and tear gas to repress protesters. Okay, well, first of all, this is not this is not in Gaza. Okay, so and it's not in the Middle East. This is in New Delhi, which is in India. So that actually refutes Jamarl Thomas's point. Oh, this isn't a religious conflict. Then why are they doing it in New Delhi? Who are these people? Those aren't people who are they're fighting for international solidarity due to ethnic repression. They're Muslim fanatics. Okay? They're saying delete Israel. It says right here. Okay, so then what about this line? Organizers of the demonstration in Gaza said Israeli army drones hovered above their land, dropping flammable materials on piles of old tires and tear gas to repress protesters. Well, how did those old tires get there? Why do they have old tires at a protest? Do they just drag old tires into the middle of a protest area and just have them there for storage? I mean, I was joking about this last week, but I don't think that's not the way it works. This is the Independent. The Independent is not, they are not a pro-Israel publication. In fact, you could probably say that they're fairly anti-Israeli. It says approximately 10,000 people gathered to fly flags and kites, burn tires, throw rocks, and return tear gas canisters at Israeli Defense Force troops. So the Independent is directly contradicting the line of Telesur, because if the piles of tires are there in order to be burnt, why do the Palestinians care if the Israelis are dumping flammable liquid on it with drones? If that even happens, think about it this way too. How can you propose that the Israelis would equip drones with the thrust to hold tanks of flammable liquid aloft that would have enough flammable liquid in order to douse these tires on them? Where's the video of it? There were so many journalists there. Where's the video of it? How come Telesur, which is the company that Abby Martin works for, they don't have any video of that? There's tons of videos of the day. There's all this video of this. How come nobody caught video of it? There's so much video of everything else happening that day. How come you don't see any video of the drones dousing the tires with flammable liquid? Okay, it's fake news. Another one. Here you see actual children over here dragging tires over to the border. You see that the fence is right fucking here. Okay, and you want to tell me, oh, the Israelis lit the tires on fire? Who is this? This is Dawn. This is a Pakistani publication. It's not an Israeli publication. It's not an American publication. It's not a right-wing publication. It's Pakistani. Okay? It appears in Urdu. See? I can't read Urdu, but I could give it a try. Nah, not really. This is Dawn. And they say, okay, let's look up the word tires here. Okay? Israeli troops fired live rounds and tear gas as thousands of Palestinians protested near the Gaza border fence on Friday, with some demonstrators burning tires, throwing stones, and flying blazing kites. At least 413 Palestinians were wounded, including 80 by live fire, Gaza health officials said. It's interesting how the other 413 were wounded. It might have been like smoke inhalation. It's also funny that people complain about tear gas being lofted at them, but they're burning tires. So either the tear gas is an issue or it's not an issue. Because if you're burning tires while you're also inhaling tear gas, you're obviously not trying to survive. Okay, either one of them could cause severe lung damage. Okay? But here again, youths carried tires on their shoulders as they had to join other protesters gathered along the border fence with Israel. That's from Agence France Presse, AFP. Okay? You see here, there's burning tires in front of the border. So I don't know what to say. Are you trying to tell me that the Pakistani paper Dawn is controlled by the Israelis, and therefore Tel Assur is the only publication that knows about these mysterious drones that burn tires? They just douse flammable liquid on tires? Because if you are, then I'd like to see some video. And if there is no video, it didn't happen. You know the way media works nowadays. Moving on from there, we're going to talk a little about. We're going to come back to Pakistan, by the way. There's no dodging this, by the way. We have a real issue with Pakistan, but we're going to come back to it. What Jamarl does is he takes Abby Martin's protestations that nothing is happening in Venezuela that's untoward at face value. And what he does is basically frame it in the context of, well, our economic sanctions on Venezuela are really the problem there. It's not the issue of the way that they've looted the country, the Chavistas. Probably 10 or 12 years ago, 14 years ago, I was probably rooting for the Chavistas. I remember watching video of the demonstrations on TV, and I was like, yeah, I don't think that, America should be getting involved there. I think, America should, first of all, I think Latin America deserved somebody to challenge the United States. And somebody did. That was Hugo Chavez. And in the process, he also enslaved his country. And he's wreaked so much havoc on his country that sometimes I wonder, maybe in a certain sense, it was better that would have never happened. That Chavez would have never been released from prison in the 90s, and that the Venezuelans would be spared the horrible reality that they live in today. But we're not going to talk about the famine today. We're not going to talk about the refugees today. We're going to talk about the fact that Abby Martin never talks about PDVSA. She never talks about it, and she never will talk about it. Because the fact is that the only industry that matters that's left in Venezuela is not Tel Assur TV. Tel Assur TV is a giant liability. Do you think people across Latin America watch Tel Assur TV? Do you think that there's really some? Do you think they want to watch a TV station run by an agglomeration of different countries that the majority of them are failing? I can't speak for Uruguay. I believe Uruguay is probably not doing too well, but they're not a dictatorship. They're not run by basically a group of idiots kept in power by China and Cuba. I don't think people otherwise. Tel Assur would probably be much more successful. Otherwise, their content would have a much bigger imprint on Latin America, and they don't. Okay? And the fact of the matter is that PDVSA, which is Petróleos de Venezuela, they are basically going bust. They don't have enough oil. They can't pump enough oil because they don't have enough infrastructure, and they've ruined the company almost beyond repair. They literally have almost ceased to function. And that's the only industry left in Venezuela that generates any sort of revenue. And the fact that Abby Martin is not taken to task over this is it really shows that either you don't have the knowledge or you don't have the courage to really talk about the issues that matter for Venezuela, because you don't care. Also, if you listen to that entire conversation I had with him, I really got the sense that he doesn't care about what happens in those countries, whether it's Venezuela or Nicaragua. By the way, Nicaragua also has a stake in Tel Assur TV. So you have Abby Martin, who's drawing a salary from a company that's owned by two countries where there's massive starvation in Venezuela, and you have these riots happening nonstop in Nicaragua because people, their social security is threatened, their taxes are being raised, the government is out on the streets shooting people, the police are basically, you have police and pro-government militias shooting crowds of people in both of these countries. And for Jamarl Thomas, the real question is whether the United States has a special relationship with Nicaragua and Venezuela. Because if it doesn't, then it doesn't really matter. But you know what? That's really a twisted way to think about it. I would say that it matters in a different way. We have many people coming to our borders, and progressives and liberals constantly say we have to take in refugees. We have to accept the world's poor because it's us who causes the poverty of these countries. No, it's not us. When you have a country that's completely melted down, is basically run by a despot who drives people almost to starvation, as in the case of Nicolas Maduro, or you have a person like Daniel Ortega who manipulated the Catholic Church and signed a pact with them, and now is running out of money because Venezuela was delivering him free oil and a lot of other aid. Okay, those are the reasons that those countries have fallen apart. It has nothing to do with the United States. The closest thing that the United States has to do with what's happening in Nicaragua was that in the 80s, there was a war where the U.S. supplied the side that was against the current people who are in the Nicaraguan government. But the fact is that even the president's brother, who was the head of the military at the time, okay, the president's name is Daniel Ortega, the president's brother's name is Humberto Ortega, even he has said, okay, I'll pull this up. Okay, this is from the Miami Herald. It says Ortega's repressive regime cannot survive. Even his younger brother, a former Sandinista leader, says so. So Humberto Ortega was the chief of staff of the Nicaraguan government up until the mid-90s, after his brother left power. And he says, okay, where's that quote? And he says here, there's a before and after the recent events. This government cannot go back to what it was before this crisis. It cannot go back to its previous monopolistic and authoritarian ways of governing. He added that the presidential couple, as Nicaraguans refer to the president and his powerful wife, Vice President Rosario Murillo, don't have a future, much like the current political opposition. The only way to get out of the crisis will be through a national agreement and dialogue brokered by the church. Last week, nearly 50 former Sandinista guerrillas and officials included. So these are not far-right individuals. Okay, these aren't people who are, graduates of the School of the Americas, which was a murderous program that was run by the CIA during the Cold War. This is a post-Cold War problem, Jamarl, and you can't pretend anymore that we're stuck in the Cold War where it's, the CIA is trying to topple. These are people who are former Sandinistas. They signed a statement denouncing the Ortega regime as a bloody dictatorship, which was directly responsible for the recent bloodbaths. Other former top Sandinista government officials, such as Ernesto Cardenal, Luis Carrion, Victor Hugo Tinoco, and Sergio Ramirez, long ago broke ranks with their former comrade, accusing him of becoming a Somoza-like dictator. Who was Somoza? Anastasio Somoza Debayle, the previous president of Nicaragua up until 1979. That's when the Sandinistas first came to power. So people have reached a consensus that this left-wing, supposedly socialist dictatorship has become effectively a mirror image of the right-wing dictatorship of Somoza in the 70s. The only difference is, and this is why Jamarl doesn't care, the countries that are supporting Nicaragua now are not the United States, as in the Somoza period. It's China and some other countries, Venezuela, Cuba, to some extent Russia as well. And I'm not saying this because I want wars with those countries. I'm not saying this because I want to be involved in an intervention in Nicaragua. I'm saying this because he doesn't really care that it's happening. And I do. And I don't want throngs of Nicaraguans coming towards our border in caravans like has happened recently in Honduras. Now, I'll grant you this. I wasn't talking as much about Honduras as I have about Nicaragua. Okay, I would say that I've asked people from Honduras to come on the program. I've asked people from Nicaragua to come on the program. The only country where people are willing to come on the program, from Latin America, is Venezuela. And those people already live here. And why are there so many American or Venezuelan Americans? Okay, let's go to there's 321,000 Venezuelans living in the U.S. as of 2015. Okay. But there's already a massive refugee crisis in Venezuela, or on the borders of Venezuela with Brazil and Colombia. Okay, and these people are living all the way in the rainforest. It says Brazil is not a right-wing dictatorship. It says Brazil state seeks to shut Venezuelan border to stop refugee flow. Okay, the leaders of Brazil's northern state of Roraima on Friday asked the Supreme Court for permission to temporarily close the only land border crossing with neighboring Venezuela to halt the massive and disorderly arrival of refugees. This is in April. This is from Reuters. Okay, I'm not using, I'm not using the Organization of American States media. I'm not using NPR. Okay, state media. Brazil's President Michel Temer, attending the Summit of the Americas in Lima, said that closing the border was unthinkable. Roraima Governor Sueli Campos petitioned the High Court to order the federal government to step up assistance for her state to deal with what she called a humanitarian crisis. She also asked that the border be closed until orderly immigration procedures could be put in place. It says more than 50,000 Venezuelan refugees have arrived in Roraima since last year. That's between January and April. 50,000 people between January and April. Fleeing an economic crisis and political strife in their country, the governor told reporters, the influx was nearly equal to 10% of the state's population of 520,000 inhabitants. The refugees have overloaded health, housing, and education services, Campos said, bringing the threat of disease and social disorder. Many of the refugees have walked hundreds of kilometers to reach the state capital, Boa Vista, and have been sleeping in squares and other precarious areas in the city. Campos said that every day more than 500 Venezuelans cross the open border where immigrants are allowed to enter with no visa just by showing a Venezuelan document. We have to require more documents, vaccination cards, criminal background checks, the inspection of cars. There has to be a way to contain this influx. The federal government declared an emergency in February to boost funding for Roraima and double the number of troops at the border. It has also begun to use Air Force planes to move Venezuelan refugees to larger Brazilian cities. But it has said it will not close the border because that would violate international treaties. Temer said his government was delivering assistance requested by Roraima, and he hoped the Supreme Court would deny the state's plea to shut the border. It is not Brazil's way of doing things, closing borders, he told reporters. So I want to make this clear. And I don't know which side to stand on. Obviously the people of that state are, they have to deal with a massive influx of poor people. But what Jamarl Thomas is essentially saying is, as long as that is not involving U.S. intervention in that country, or what he calls a special relationship, as has happened with the Israelis and obviously their conflict with the Palestinians, as long as that's not an issue, he doesn't give a fuck. He doesn't care. And the fact of the matter is that those people, a lot of those people will end up reaching our shores because Brazil is not going to be able to adequately sustain that influx of population. Roraima is in the Amazon basin. Okay, there's hardly anybody living there, and it's basically the middle of the fucking rainforest. Okay, and you know they've already devastated their own economy, the Venezuelans. Now, what are they doing? They're basically spreading their misery to other countries. This is not a knock against the Venezuelan people. It's a knock against Telesur TV and its masters, the Venezuelan government. Okay, I have no qualms with Venezuelan people, whether here or in the United States. I'm just saying there is here or there, here in the United States or there in Colombia or Brazil. I am just saying that a lot of people should consider what's going to happen if you have these masses of people. Remember, it's only 50,000 people. It's 50,000 people only in the first 4 months of 2018 into one state of Brazil. Okay? That's a massive refugee influx. Okay, now to the next issue. Citgo, they're having their oil basically, the drip is running dry, or the spigot's running dry. Sorry, I do sound like kind of a dick right now, but they can't pump fucking oil. And PDVSA, for those of you that don't know, has a subsidiary here in the U.S. called Citgo, which is in complete chaos right now. And they're having to buy. This is what's so fucked up. And this is something Abby Martin will never discuss, ever. Because if she was, she would probably begin to understand that soon there's not going to be anybody to pay her unless China or Russia effectively takes over PDVSA and the entire Venezuelan government. Okay? What they're doing now is they're buying Colombian and Ecuadorian heavy crude on the spot market, as well as Azeri light from the Black Sea region and Arab heavy and medium crudes, according to the Reuters data and traders. So you can go to a website called oilprice.com, or there's another one called Platts S&P, who are, they're very useful for that, for following the crude oil industry. Venezuela is a country entirely dependent right now on crude oil. Why? Because Chavez and Maduro basically scared literally every other business out of business or out of Venezuela. Almost the entire private sector has been decimated. Whatever's left is clearly not enough to sustain the massive expenditures of the government. Okay, so what people don't understand is, Venezuela has a lot of they have a massive amount of crude oil, the largest known reserves in the world, but the oil quality that comes out of the ground there is not exactly ready to enter the open market. It's heavy crude. It needs to be refined and basically diluted by lighter crudes. You bring in lighter crude from the Gulf. Gulf crude oil doesn't need as much refinement as the Venezuelan, so you need to blend them. However, now notice what it says here. They can't even use their own heavy crude. They have to buy it from neighboring Colombia and Ecuador. Do you realize how incompetent that must be? Because Colombia is a neighboring country that's also first of all, Colombia doesn't have nearly as much oil as Venezuela. Okay, so there's no excuse to talk about sanctions here. We're talking about the oil industry. When we're talking about the oil industry, sanctions don't mean shit because people will buy your oil. Okay? Sanctions are irrelevant when you're talking about oil. Even at the height of the sanctions regime against Saddam, people were buying their oil. People were finding it was possible to buy. The UN even set up a corrupt program called Oil for Food. Okay, Iraq under Saddam, You can say whatever you want about him. It never reached the level of humanitarian crisis as Venezuela. Okay, and then we went and fucked them up, unfortunately. Where was I? What I'm getting at here is that basically their industry is so inefficient now. It's so decrepit and falling apart that they can't even use their own heavy crude. They have to buy it from smaller countries like Ecuador, which, by the way, Ecuador is not exactly the right-wing, Milton Friedman model of a country, right? And that's besides the point. If they were, maybe Venezuela wouldn't be buying oil from them. If you thought of that, don't you think that this is what's odd, that everything is couched in this weird morality on the progressive side? I don't care. I'll even pose this to the few progressives that watch my show. Why is everything dependent on morality? And then when I talk about actual industries, you can't explain anything. You can't explain why their oil industry is actually falling apart. People will buy your oil. It doesn't matter what the fuck you do. They'll buy your oil. You know it. In fact, there was such an oil crisis, this past week. Venezuela, it's not an issue of sanctions. It's an issue that they can't produce enough oil to sell to the people who already have committed to buying from them. Citgo, which is their own company. You have, here's a few other ones that are listed down here. Valero Energy, they actually have some of their stations here. Pretty shitty gas stations, if I might add. Although they do have those pickles in a bag. Vital, Nayara Energy, Reliance Energy of India, which is I wouldn't say that they're well known, and China National Petroleum Corporation were waiting on Monday near Jose Port for crude. Okay, so you have tankers of countries that are waiting for crude oil. You don't need the sanctions are irrelevant here. As long as you can trade with these three countries around the world, sanctions don't mean shit. Okay? If you want to trade with the world, all you need to do is have relations with the United States, China, or India. It's not, you don't have to have relations with all three. You have to have relations with one of them. Okay? And the fact of the matter is that I believe Valero, in fact, I think Valero is a U.S. based company. If not, it might be one of these other countries, like Italy. Italy I think is ENI. It's irrelevant though, because there are countries. The sanctions don't mean anything here. When you have, and it's just in this article, you have 4 oil companies waiting for crude oil from Venezuela. What's the excuse? What's the excuse? Don't give me shit about sanctions. I don't want to hear that Abby Martin shit. Okay, so that's it. We'll get rid of some of these. Dawn. Oops. I was going to give links to these, but I'll do that later. The relationship with Pakistan through the years, here's from Times of India. Up until 1965, the U.S. had, year after year, military aid with Pakistan. They suspended it during its conflict with India. Okay, now you might say, well, that's unfair, because why didn't the U.S. suspend relations with Israel? Why didn't they suspend military aid with Israel, during the Six-Day War? The answer is that they didn't give military aid to Israel until after that war, like I think 3 years after. Okay? Up until 1967, the country that was supplying military hardware to the Israelis was France. That's why I think their jets were all Dassault jets, D-A-S-S-A-U-L-T jets. Okay, so the special relationship between the United States and Pakistan actually goes back a whole 18 years, possibly, 20 years longer than the one with the Israelis. Okay, Pakistan and the United States have a special relationship. It's gone through some rough times. Now the military aid remained practically nil for the next 15 years, but according to This is Newsweek. They said that in the meantime, $2.55 billion was going to Pakistan from the U.S. in economic aid. And that, according to this inflation calculator, is over $10 billion in today's money. Okay? Then Ronald Reagan gave them all that aid back. Reagan, people say was the perfect guy. Then he gives all that money to Pakistan. That's why, I'm not a Republican. I don't even consider myself technically, I'm a libertarian conservative. I'm not a conservative of the Reaganite type. No offense, but I think something like this was in certain respects, it was a problem. It was a mistake in some respects. It says the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan changed everything. Pakistan's ISI security apparatus became the primary means of funneling covert U.S. assistance to anti-Soviet forces in Afghanistan. From 1980 to 1990, the United States ramped up its contributions for both development and military purposes, sending more than $5 billion over the course of the decade. So let's look at inflation. Let's go for the latest here. Okay. Change 1 decimal point. Okay, that's the equivalent of $9 billion in military aid to Pakistan. Now, and again, you're talking to somebody. I oppose military aid to the Israelis too. I would say that giving more military aid to Pakistan is also a mistake. So why can't we acknowledge that there's a special relationship with Pakistan? Probably because Jamarl Thomas would say, well, it's not special in the way that I think it is. It's only special if it's a wink wink and scratch him on the bunny ears behind the head during a group photo. That's a special relationship. But the relationship is not. Now, I will say, I think AIPAC does have undue influence over the U.S. judiciary, and I think that the time's come. It's been overdue for years for there to be, a different dynamic to the relationship between the U.S. and Israel and other Middle Eastern countries. Whether it's Saudi Arabia or Egypt or whatever. It's not time to change the dynamic. They're independent countries. But even while Pakistan was serving a strategic Cold War purpose, concerns persisted about the country's nuclear ambitions. That gave President George H.W. Bush an easy out from the massive funding commitments in 1990 after the fall of the Soviet Union. So the reason why we were giving them money was because India was more pro-Soviet than they were pro-American during the war. They were a non-aligned country, but they were closer to the Soviet Union than they were to the U.S. Aid over the next decade withered to $429 million in economic assistance and $5.2 million in military assistance. A drop-off Pakistanis still cite bitterly, accusing the United States of leaving them high and dry during the decade. So understand what that means. After the Cold War, Pakistan was expecting the United States to continue supplying them with lots of military and economic aid. Even though, to be honest with you, why would they need more military aid? Who were they still fighting? Why would Pakistan need more military aid? To get into more wars with India, which they did. I think they got into another war in 1999, the Kargil War, they call it. That was the one that brought Musharraf to power. Those of you that remember him. Since 9/11, the United States has once again bolstered its funding commitment, sending nearly $9 billion in military assistance, both to aid and reimburse Pakistan for its operations in the unwieldy border regions with Afghanistan. Another $3.6 billion has funded economic and diplomatic initiatives. But U.S. officials and journalists' accounts have raised concerns that such funds are not being used as intended, and not just because of the typical concerns about corruption. Documented military and civilian government deals with Taliban elements, like a 2004 agreement with Waziri militant leader Nek Mohammed, have confirmed that money intended to fight the Taliban is, in many cases, being used instead to pay them off. Islamabad is currently battling Taliban fighters in Waziristan. So understand what that means. So Jamarl Thomas is saying, he basically said several times when I challenged him, I said, I don't understand why you don't care about the U.S. special relationship with Pakistan. We do send them military aid. We're involved in their conflicts with Afghanistan. And they also happen to be involved in conflicts with India, which I personally am not interested in having any U.S. conflict with India because there's no point. Why would we care? I mean, by the way, last year, or was it? No, it was in 2016, Obama attempted to have basically the F-16 manufactured exclusively in India. Do you understand how ridiculous that is? We were going to have the F-16, which is a legacy aircraft, okay, but it's still under manufacture. We would shift all of the manufacturing for the F-16 to India. That was an agreement that Obama signed. While at the same time, we're supplying military aid to their enemy, Pakistan. Does that make any sense, Jamarl? Don't you think that's a little odd? How come you never ask questions about why we have these weird arrangements with Pakistan and India? You know, I don't want India to invade Pakistan. I don't want Pakistan to invade India. I think that in a certain respect, we might as well get disinvolved from that region as well. I mean, Afghanistan, we already have enough problems with. Okay, when the deals fall through, as rapidly shifting alliances in Pakistan's tribal regions often do, that money ultimately ends up funding the U.S. to the insurgency. U.S. officials have expressed particular concerns about the Pakistani government's links to the Haqqani network in North Waziristan, which reportedly has ties to al-Qaeda. At the same time, former President Pervez Musharraf has recently admitted to using U.S. military funding to strengthen defenses against India. So this is a key thing, okay? Now, again, I'm not for having conflict, whether the U.S. invade, having a problem. I don't want the U.S. to have a hostile relationship to Pakistan, and I don't want the U.S. to have a hostile relationship with India. But, the former president, George Bush's buddy, said, okay, this is from the BBC, he admitted that U.S. aid was diverted to strengthening defenses against India. So that's not of interest to you, that U.S. aid was, forget about fucking the Palestinians, okay? I understand that you have a soft spot for them. Why would you want U.S. aid being sent to a country that is basically, has a hard-on to fight India? Okay, do you understand how problematic that is? Instead, you want to talk about the moral issue and whatever. There is no moral issue here. There's a strategic issue. The strategic issue here is that the United States, why is the U.S. involved in giving money to the Israelis? I believe, like you have also admitted, that they have a strategic interest that, you view as a problem in, Syria, in other parts of the Middle East, Iraq, in the oil industry over there. Okay, and I would agree with you that I think that the aid is problematic. Why can't you then come and, come meet me halfway here and say, well, maybe we should protest the Pakistanis as well? Because there's no reason we should be seeking any conflict with India and funding a country that's using our aid in order to get into a conflict with India. And if it was the other way around, I would say, why would we be funding India in order that they strengthen defenses against Pakistan? I mean, those countries should, God willing, those countries will have a settlement and there won't be any more wars against them. I'm not holding my breath, though. So then 2009 to 2014, a new 5-year, $7.5 billion assistance package was passed by Congress in September and signed by President Obama in October, with stipulations explicitly prohibiting funds from being used for nuclear proliferation, to support terrorist groups, or to pay for attacks in neighboring countries. It also put a new emphasis on the bottom line. So it's funny that in a treaty, in an assistance package, you have to put in language explicitly saying you can't use this money in order to pay for a tax in a neighboring country. That's supposed to be. I mean, why would they have to add that language, Jamarl? They also put a new emphasis on the bottom line, reserving the right to cut off aid if Pakistan fails to crack down on militants. Those restrictions have opened a rift between the military and the civilian government in Pakistan, which maintained an uneasy relationship following nearly a decade of military rule under Musharraf. Military leaders worry they are being sidelined by the increased U.S. emphasis on development and accountability, claiming the bill threatens Pakistan's sovereignty. No, when you accept aid from a foreign country, when you accept the aid, that threatens your sovereignty. That's why the Israelis are out of their minds, that they're accepting aid and then they complain about their sovereignty being compromised. Either you want the aid and then you accept the fact that there's a quid pro quo, or you don't want the aid and you want your independence. And I would prefer independence. But supporters of the bill say the restrictions are no more stringent than previous ones and accuse Pakistani leaders of manufacturing a crisis to undermine the civilian government. So understand what the problem is here. First of all, the war in Afghanistan, would you say that the Pakistanis have been helpful in it? I wouldn't say so. I'd say that they've been a real problem. Okay? And this is from 2009. That's before that's before they discovered that, supposedly, if some people don't believe it, supposedly Bin Laden was being sheltered by the Pakistanis in Abbottabad. Okay, that was before that. It was already problematic at the time. Okay. So you saw the inflation calculator. This is Nicaragua. You're having people dying every day. At least 139 people have been killed in clashes with security forces and armed gangs loyal to Ortega, according to the Nicaraguan Center for Human Rights, which also said more than 1,000 have been injured. Well, I mean, what's odd, I think I'll finish on this one. We're not going to go into the casualties here of the casualties in Gaza, because I've already tweeted those to Jamarl. If he can pretend he doesn't see my tweets, or either that or I'm shadow banned. But the fact of the matter is that I want to understand this, okay? There is a state of war between Gaza and Israel. He can claim that it's an asymmetrical war, but there's no rule in the world, there's no rule in life that conflicts have to be symmetrical. Who made that up? Okay, is that because people are used to playing poker with four people, or that's not the way war works. War's not a board game. It's not like chess or Risk or something like that. It's a real conflict, and the people with an advantage, in normal times they would press that advantage. What's happening in Nicaragua, what's happening in Venezuela has nothing to do with war. You're talking about peacetime repression and massacres of civilian populations. And for Jamarl to claim, well, this is irrelevant. This is irrelevant because we don't have a special relationship with Nicaragua or with Venezuela. Well, I mean, you don't understand how. Then either you don't understand or you're not willing to acknowledge how those conflicts, which are closer to the U.S. than Israel and Palestine, affect our country. Those people could reach our borders much easier than could an Israeli or a Palestinian or whatever. And, I would admit I'm biased in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. What bias would I have in Nicaragua? I don't even know anybody from there. Okay, I would say, when Ortega was reelected a few years ago, I didn't give a shit. But now this is happening. So for him to claim that this is a totally different issue, it is a different issue. It's worse. When you have people basically being shot at their own university by police officers while demonstrating because of social security cuts and higher taxes, that is state oppression And that is basically a reason that we should worry about what's happening in Nicaragua. I'm not talking about intervening. I'm not talking about going in there and throwing the U.S.'s weight around and getting the CIA involved. I'm saying you have to worry about it, and you have to discuss it. And I've discussed all of them tonight. I've discussed Pakistan. I've discussed Venezuela. I've discussed Israel and Palestine. I've discussed Nicaragua. And he won't discuss. He'll only discuss Israel and Palestine. That's where the disparity is. Abby Martin, same thing. You know, she'll discuss Israel and Palestine, and then when it comes to Venezuela, the word PDVSA will never leave her mouth because she's afraid. She's afraid. PDVSA is, as long as it remains, you know, supposedly financially solvent, it remains the only means for her to receive any money from Venezuela. Once they run out of money, she has to find a new boss. She has to find a new client for her bullshit, you know, quote unquote reporting, you know, her supposed journalism. So I'm going to leave it there. It's been almost an hour, and I will post the links to this. So I hope you have a good Tuesday, and, you know, viva Venezuela, viva Libertad.